Umar and Fatu were the kind of couple everyone in the town of Mamba admired and deeply in love. They seemed to have it all. Umar was a successful businessman with several properties under his name, and Fatu was his quiet yet strong partner, always supporting him with grace and tenderness. Their marriage felt like a dream, filled with laughter, understanding, and a shared vision of a big, happy family. They had already imagined the kind of parents they would be, the values they would instill, and even the games they'd play with their future children. They were not just partners in marriage, but also teammates in building a home filled with warmth. The first year passed without a child, but they weren't worried. It'll happen when the time is right, they both reassured each other, clinging to their hope with patience and faith. But as time slipped into the second and then the third year, and there was still no pregnancy, worry started to sneak in like a shadow at dusk. Feichu visited a hospital and was told everything was normal. They tried another one together, still the same results. Medically, there was nothing wrong with either of them. This should have been good news, but instead it brought confusion and frustration. The joy that once filled their home began to fade. Umar, who once saw life as a game to win, began questioning the point of all his wealth if he couldn't share it with a child. Fatty spent long days alone, crying silently, her heart aching for something she couldn't control. Their once vibrant home turned quiet and heavy with longing. Conversations became shorter, meals less joyful, and every passing month felt like a reminder of what was missing. Slowly, the silence between them became more painful than any diagnosis could have been. It wasn't until one evening, when Umar saw the deep sadness in Fatu's eyes, that he decided enough was enough. Sitting her down, he spoke honestly from the heart. "My love, I know this has been hard on both of us, but we're letting it consume our joy," he said. "Maybe this is a test of our faith, and maybe the answer is not just in waiting, but in how we live while we wait." That night, they made a choice. Instead of drowning in sorrow, they would start living like parents even before becoming ones. Feitu suggested surrounding themselves with children, hosting small parties for kids, visiting orphanages, donating to struggling mothers. It wouldn't fill the void entirely, but it would bring meaning back to their days. And so they began. Slowly, their home started to come alive again, not with the cry of a newborn, but with the laughter of children they invited into their lives. In giving joy to others, they unknowingly began to heal themselves. One ordinary afternoon, after returning from one of their monthly visits to the orphanage, Umar and Fatu sat quietly in the living room. The sound of the car engine had long faded, but Umar's thoughts were loud. He turned to his wife and gently asked her what she thought about the children they'd been spending time with. Fatu, caught off guard, answered honestly. She pitied them and felt heartbroken for children whose parents had abandoned them. Then Umar said something that shifted the room's entire energy. "What if we adopted one?" The words felt foreign, even to him, but they came from a place of love, from a desire to give a child a home and to finally experience the joy of being called Papa. But Fatu reacted with disbelief, even offense. Even offense. Her face changed. She looked at him like he had just betrayed something sacred. "Why would you suggest that? Is it desperation? I don't want another woman's child. I want my own," she cried. Her rejection wasn't out of cruelty, it was pain talking. She had spent years hoping and praying, and to her, adoption felt like giving up. After that day, Fatu doubled down on finding a biological solution. She researched tirelessly, called clinics in other cities, and scheduled appointments with top fertility experts. She wasn't ready to let go of the idea of carrying her own child. Meanwhile, Umar, though still quietly open to adoption, chose to support her in her renewed effort. He didn't want to push her, even if he felt her rejection of adoption was unfair. A few weeks later, they traveled out of town to meet with a well-known fertility doctor. The journey was long, but filled with silent hope. At the hospital, after several tests, the doctor gave them the same answer they had heard many times before. They were both perfectly healthy, even unusually fertile by some standards. He gave them supplements just in case, but no real explanation as to why conception hadn't happened. Feichu was devastated. Her hopes had been high, and now they came crashing down again. They drove home quietly, with disappointment hanging in the air like thick fog. Then something strange happened, something neither of them could have expected. On the way back, Umar pulled over by the side of a rural road to relieve himself. As he stood by the bushes, he heard a faint, unfamiliar cry. At first, he dismissed it, thinking it was just his imagination, but then it came again, clearer, sharper. He followed the sound, heart pounding, and found a newborn baby lying on the ground, wrapped in nothing. Shocked and speechless, he picked the baby up and brought him to the car. Fatu stared in disbelief. "Where did that baby come from?" she asked, her voice rising. Umar explained, still shaken, but Fatu's reaction was immediate. They needed to take the baby to the police or to an orphanage, not bring him home. But when they arrived back in their town, Umar didn't head toward any institution. He drove straight to their house. "You prayed this morning for a miracle?" he reminded her gently. "What if this is it?" Fatu, still processing everything, didn't respond. She left the baby in Umar's care and retreated into the bedroom. But what happened next would slowly chip away at the walls she had built around her heart. That night, long after Umar had fallen asleep, the house fell into a deep silence until the baby's cry shattered it. The sound was sharp, raw, and insistent. Fatu woke up, irritated at first and confused. She looked over and saw Umar sleeping soundly, completely unfazed by the noise. She sat up, angry at the interruption, and got out of bed with the intention of quieting the baby, maybe even stuffing something gently into his mouth just to silence the noise. But when she stepped into the room and saw him lying there, small and helpless, crying his lungs out, something inside her cracked. It was like a wall in her chest began to crumble. The longer she stood there, the more the cries pierced through her defenses, not just through her ears, but straight to her heart. In that moment, it was as if time paused and she heard a quiet voice inside her. "What happened to your heart? You were born to be a mother. This child is innocent, just like the one you've been praying for." Her knees buckled beneath her, and she found herself on the floor, tears streaming down her face. No, I'm sorry," she whispered, overcome with guilt. "This isn't who I am." Without hesitation, she reached out and picked up the baby. As soon as she did, the crying stopped. He looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes and made little mouth movements, tiny signs of hunger. Fatu had read every book, every blog post, every article on infant care in the hopes that one day she'd need the knowledge. Now all that preparation kicked in. She rushed to the kitchen in a panic, unsure what to do, but relief flooded her when she saw the baby formula Umar had bought. She followed the instructions carefully, mixing the warm bottle with trembling hands, and returned to the room. Sitting down, she cradled the baby gently and fed him. He drank hungrily, and for the first time in years, Fatu felt something shift deep inside, something healing. When he finished eating, she burped him, changed his diaper, and rocked him slowly until he laid off to sleep. But she didn't leave the room. She couldn't leave the room. She couldn't. She lay beside him and watched him breathe, his tiny chest rising and falling, and allowed herself to feel the fullness of that moment. Sleep eventually came to her too as peace settled over them both. By morning, Umar woke up to an unfamiliar quiet. He reached for Fatu but found the bed empty. A brief moment of panic set in before he remembered the baby. He got up and walked down the hallway, peeking into the guest room, and what he saw stopped him in his track. There on the bed was his wife curled up gently beside the sleeping baby, holding him like he had always belonged. A wave of emotion hit him. He stepped inside quietly, and Faru turned her head toward him with the softest smile. "Good morning," she whispered. Umar's voice was low with wonder. "Let me take him for a bit." "He must be tired." But Faru shook her head and smiled again. "I'm already feeding him," she said warmly. "And his name is you. It means God increases. He's our miracle." Umar's eyes welled with tears. The same woman who once refused to even consider adoption had now claimed this abandoned baby as her own. In that moment, their story took a new direction, one no longer defined by waiting, but by receiving love in the most unexpected form. You grew into the heart of the home. From the very beginning, he brought light into every corner of the house, filling spaces that had once echoed with silence. Seitu and Umar adored him. They would even jokingly argue over who got to carry him more. If Fatu had you in her arms too long, Umar would teasingly demand his turn, and if Umar was holding him for too long, Fatu would come right back to reclaim her spot. They laughed more, played more, and lived with a kind of joy they hadn't known in years. Then came the miracle no one expected 2 years later. Fatu became pregnant. It was as if Yu's prayers, said in childlike faith every night, had somehow unlocked a door that had been shut for so long. The pregnancy felt surreal after all those years of tears and disappointment, but it was real. When their second son, Lamine, was born, it felt like a dream. You welcomed his little brother with an excitement that could only come from pure love. He would rush home from school, wash up, and head straight to hold Lamine, talk to him, and make him giggle. The boys grew up with a bond so natural that people who didn't know their story assumed they were twins. Umar enrolled both boys in the best school in town, and life was beautiful, at least on the surface. But something began to shift when Lamine turned 5. It was subtle at first. Umar became more distant and pensive. He began to have thoughts he'd never allowed himself to entertain before. "I have 2 sons," he would think, "but do I really?" As Lamine grew and began to resemble Umar more and more, those questions became heavier. One evening, as the boys were playing with their puzzles and Fatu was in the kitchen, Umar sat alone in the backyard, staring off into space. Fatu joined him and asked what was wrong, and his answer shook her. "How many sons do we really have?" Confused, she answered gently, "2, you and Lamine," but Umar didn't agree. He began to speak about inheritance, fairness, and bloodlines. "I can't give what I've worked for to someone who's not truly my son," he said firmly. Fatu was stunned. It had been 14 years since they took you in. How could he suddenly say such a thing? "We've raised him, loved him. He brought us blessings. He's our child," she pleaded. But Umar's heart had already closed. "I picked him from the bush. I've done more than enough. Lamine is my only son, and he'll get everything," he said coldly. After that conversation, things started to change quickly and painfully. Umar, who had once doted on you, now treated him with indifference, even hostility. He scolded him harshly over the smallest mistakes, using cruel words that cut deeper than punishment. You was confused. He tried harder to please his father, but nothing he did seemed to be enough. The warmth he had always felt from Umar was gone. Even worse, Umar began trying to poison Laman's view of his older brother, saying things that a child couldn't fully understand but still felt deeply. Fortunately, Lamine adored you too much to be swayed. He continued to cling to his brother, asking for his help, playing with him, and crawling into his bed at night. Fatu watched all of this unfold with a breaking heart. No matter how much she begged her husband, Umar had made up his mind. The pain was unbearable. Finally, fearing for Yu's emotional safety, Fatu secretly arranged to transfer him to a boarding school in another city. When she dropped him off, she told him it was just for a little while, that everything would be okay. Yu, wise beyond his years, simply nodded and hugged her tightly. He didn't ask questions, he just said, "I love you, Mama. I'll be okay." Life at the boarding school was difficult for Yu. He wasn't used to being away from home, especially from his mother and younger brother, who had always been his safe space. The separation hit harder than he'd expected, and what made it worse was the silence. Weeks passed and he didn't hear from anyone. No phone calls, no visits, not even letters. He tried not to let it show, but inside he felt forgotten. At first, he assumed his mother was just busy or waiting for things to settle, but soon the truth became clear: his father had cut off all contact. Fatu had tried to sneak messages through, but Umar had frozen her bank accounts and warned her not to reach out to the boy. It was as if he wanted to erase you completely. You, too young to understand the depth of his father's resentment, could only make guesses. Maybe he had done something wrong. Maybe he had failed at being the son his father wanted. At school, he relied on the kindness of his classmates who shared their food with him when he ran out of supplies. He never complained. He never asked for more. He just held on to the only thing he still had: his prayers. Back at home, Lamine was struggling too. He had never known life without his big brother, and now, suddenly, Yu was gone without a proper goodbye. Every day, he'd ask where Yu was, and every day, Fatu gave him soft answers, trying not to scare him. But Lamine was smart, and more than that, he was sensitive. He noticed the change in his father, the coldness in the house, and the sadness in his mother's eyes. He began to resent Umar quietly. "I don't want to play with father anymore," he whispered to Fatu one night. "When I grow up, I'll find you and we'll leave. Father won't see us again." Fatu's heart ached hearing those words. But she didn't scold him. Instead, she gently corrected him, encouraging him to pray for his father instead. That night, the two little boys prayed in separate places, one in a lonely school dorm, the other in his bedroom at home, both asking for love to come back into their lives. Fatu stayed up that night, unable to sleep, knowing deep down something had to change soon. Her family was falling apart. The change, however, came not through words, but through a crisis. Lamine fell seriously ill. What started as a minor fever quickly turned into something much worse. His body became weak, pale, and unresponsive to medication. The doctors were puzzled. Blood transfusions didn't seem to help. Within a day, the new blood would disappear as if it had never been given. 8 pints of blood were used in just 1 week. Nothing made sense. Fatu, desperate and exhausted, accused Umar of bringing this darkness upon their home. "We were blessed, you brought us light, and now look what we've become," she cried in the hospital hallway, but Umar still resisted the idea that you had anything to do with Layman's condition. It wasn't until the doctor said Lami might not make it through the next 24 hours that something inside him broke. His hands trembled, his breath caught in his throat, and for the first time in years, he felt fear not of death, but of regret. Without saying a word, he turned to Fatu and said, "Take me to you now." Fatu didn't ask questions. She grabbed the keys, and together they drove for hours to the boarding school. When they arrived, Umar ran like a man chasing his last chance at redemption. When Umar saw you again, it was like time had frozen. The boy he had once held in his arms, laughed with, called son for over a decade, stood in front of him with a mix of fear and confusion in his eyes. Yu wasn't sure what to expect. The last time they spoke, Umar had treated him like a stranger, but now the same man, his father, was standing before him, breathless, eyes wet, arms trembling. "My son Umar said through tears, 'Please forgive me. Come home, I need you. Lamine needs you.'" He looked at him in silence. Then he turned to see his mother standing behind, quietly crying and nodding. He didn't speak, he just stepped inside to pack. But Umar stopped him, saying they had no time. We'll get you new things. Your brother needs you now. During the drive, you finally asked what happened to Lamine. Fatu explained everything, the illness, the transfusions, the prayers. Yu's heart raced. His little brother, the boy who never stopped hugging him, was lying in a hospital bed, possibly taking his last breath. The moment they arrived, Yu rushed into the hospital and found Lamine pale, barely breathing, a thin thread of life left in him. He grabbed his hand and held on tight. "I'm here now," he whispered. Then he knelt beside the bed and began to pray quietly at first, then louder, his voice steady but full of emotion. He asked God not to let Lamine go. He begged for one more miracle. As he prayed, Fatu and Umar stood back, watching their son pour out his heart. Tears streamed down their faces as they realized what they had almost lost, not just Lamine, but Yu and the family they had once built on faith and love fought. Then something unexpected happened. Lamine stirred. Slowly, his eyes opened. "You?" he said weakly. "Where have you been?" Yu froze, then smiled through his tears. Fatu gasped. Umar covered his mouth in disbelief. The doctors rushed in and confirmed what no one could explain. Lamine's condition was suddenly stable. Within hours, he sat up, talking, eating. His color returned. The blood counts were normal. He was healing. It was nothing short of a miracle. And everyone knew it wasn't just science, it was love restored. When the family returned home, they held a celebration not for show, but for healing. That night, Umar stood before Fatu and Yu, apologizing with humility and shame. "I almost destroyed what God gave me," he said. "You saved us. You saved us. You saved us. You were always our son." He changed his will to reflect that truth, splitting everything equally between his boys. From that moment, peace returned to their home. The boys remained inseparable. Farah never let either feel less than the other, and Umar, now wiser, never let bitterness or pride cloud his heart again. And here's where the story hits home for all of us. Sometimes in life, we beg for miracles, and when they come, we don't recognize them because they don't fit the picture we imagined. We pray for a child, and God sends one wrapped in someone else's story. We long for blessings, but when they arrive wearing the clothes of inconvenience or imperfection, we reject them. We reject them. The truth is, love doesn't always follow bloodlines. Family is more than DNA, it's who shows up, who stays, who loves. Yu wasn't born of Fatu's womb, but he was born of her heart. And in the end, it was the son they didn't expect who saved the one they couldn't imagine losing. We would all do well to remember this. Sometimes our greatest blessings arrive quietly in forms we almost walk past. Don't let fear, ego, or tradition blind you to the miracle standing right in front of you.